If you've heard about this new GPSR legislation and you're worried about how it's going to affect you and your business, watch today's video because I am chatting to a lady called Marie Walker who is going to talk us through it. Marie, so tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all.
Love to, Joe. Thank you for inviting me in. So, yeah, my name's Marie Walker. Our company is called MTS Branding. We are a branded merchandise supplier. We are based in Northern Ireland, and that's going to be significant shortly. And I've got a few slides to show you that's going to explain the new GPSR legislation. Don't worry, it's just to emphasize some of the important points, but I will explain it to you, what it means to your business, and explain why me being based in Northern Ireland is kind of important as well. So yeah, I'll kick off with why GPSR matters to your business. So like I said, we're going to give you a brief overview of what the new general product safety regulations actually are, why it's important to be compliant, and there are going to be some potential consequences of non-compliance. So we're just going to briefly look at those as well. First of all, what is GPSR? And I guess why it might matter to your business. It stands for the General Product Safety Regulation, and it's all down to the UK and Brexit and Europe and the legislation that they want us to comply to. I'm going to refer to Northern Ireland, and I know Northern Ireland is in the UK, but for the purposes of this particular legislation, and this is why it becomes important later, for the purposes of this particular legislation, Northern Ireland is considered to be the EU. So during the course of this conversation, I'm going to refer to England, Scotland, Wales as GB, because it's just going to be easier. And that's going to become relevant to what we're talking about. GPSR is basically going to be the new kind of health and safety regulations for product sellers. And it applies to all businesses that are selling their products. And that's going to be why Northern Ireland becomes relevant in the GPSR regulations. They have been in force since 2023, but the EU gave everybody a deadline for compliance, which was actually the 13th of December 2024. So if it's something you haven't heard of yet, that might be why. There's been no notifications, no emails to product sellers. It's kind of down to us as our businesses to make sure that we're compliant by ourselves. And like it says, failure to comply can result in your products being recalled, receiving fines, and possibly even bans. There's 5 key elements to GPSR regulations, and we're going to go through what they are. They're intended to make sure that the products that are being sold within the EU are safe for use. And to comply and to be able to sell your products, these are the 5 elements that the EU want to see are in place. So first of all, that you have a safe product, and there is a portion of this that requires you to do a risk assessment of that as well, if it's relevant. You need to have appointed an EU authorised representative, being referred to in terminology as the responsible person. You need to keep accurate records about your product supply chain. And basically, you're not, if you are selling only online, you still need to make sure that your product listings are compliant as well. You're not exempt because you're selling online. The information on your packaging also needs to include the compliance information. So you aren't exempt because you're a small business, and you aren't exempt if you're an online business either. So those are the 5 main elements of being compliant. But what does it actually mean? So basically, the first part, that your product is safe. In real terms, you probably are already selling a product that is safe to sell. There are already existing UK requirements for safety. What this new legislation is trying to do is to make sure that it's sweeping up all of the listings and the types of products that don't have specific legislation, because there's going to be specific legislation from the EU for food and electronics and high risk products, and this is designed to kind of sweep up everybody else. So, but you do need to ensure that your product is safe, which might sound quite obvious It's not just about knowing that your product's safe, it's proving it. And if it's relevant, that means carrying out a risk assessment to show the potential hazards of your product and actually having that available for somebody to check if that needs to be done. And that's part of the compliance. So no cutting corners and no assuming it's probably fine. But at the same time, if you've got such a low risk product that having safety regulations would be ridiculous, then don't. This is intended to make sure that you have taken your best endeavours to make sure that you're complying. One of the important factors is traceability, though. So depending on where you are in the supply chain, then you are going to need to make sure that there is traceability back to the manufacturer. And that might mean that you are the second or third person, you've purchased off a wholesaler and you're now the reseller, but you still need to make sure that clearly recorded is where you've made your purchases from and where that customer, the product that the customer purchased, which kind of batch of products that came from. And that's a very important part of compliance, because one of the main reasons of this legislation is making sure that the marketplace doesn't get flooded with inferior products. So if there is a problem, the EU regulation board wants to make sure that it comes back to who is responsible, which will be the manufacturer. So within your supply chain, you need to make sure that you have completed records, and that can go back to wherever it is you need it to go back to, which is part of the labeling. It might not sound very exciting, but it is quite a big deal, because your packaging needs to make sure that it has visible safety instructions if that's relevant, and all clear warnings. So, for example, if your product has sharp edges or requires adult supervision, then you need to let people know that. There's no surprises, essentially. And we've all seen the products where there's a 3-page list of safety requirements. Well, that's why, because this legislation has been in place for some time. We're all now just coming on board with the same thing. The responsible person is particularly relevant to the rest of GB, you guys in England, Scotland, Wales. And the reason it's relevant is because the responsible person has to hold those records for you. It's not a title, it is actually a requirement. Every business needs to have somebody who takes charge of the compliance for them. So if there is an issue, the relevant authorities know who to come back to check the compliance, check the traceability, make sure that the risk assessment was carried out, and all of those things that we just talked about. So once you have all those things in place, it's not just having done that once, you need to make sure that you are monitoring your products after they hit the market as well. That's just as important as checking them before they leave. If there's an issue, if there's a customer complaint or a safety concern, then you need to be able to act fast and report it. So let's have a look at this thing that they're calling the responsible person. Who is the responsible person? What does it mean? What does it mean to me and what I'm doing? Like I said before, this isn't just about ticking boxes. To be able to sell, if you are based in the rest of the GB, to be able to sell into Northern Ireland and into the rest of Europe, to be compliant, you need to have appointed a responsible person. And that responsible person needs to be based in the EU, which for purposes of trade, now I know Northern Ireland is part of the UK, but for purposes of this particular legislation, they are considered to be an EU member. And that goes back to Brexit, the border agreement with Southern Ireland, all of those things. Let's not get bogged down in that. It basically means for the purposes of this particular piece of legislation, Northern Ireland is considered to be EU, which is where we come in, because we're based in Northern Ireland. Therefore, we can act as our own responsible person. We can make sure that we are compliant and our customers are compliant with GPSR, and we have held their records for them, holding the product documentation, carried out risk assessment, have the safety data, and then also cooperate with the authorities. If someone from the regulatory body knocks on the door, we can say we're the responsible person and we have all the relevant documentation. And it's crucial to GB sellers to have that responsible person if they want to continue selling their products into Northern Ireland and EU. So even though Northern Ireland is part of the UK, if you are selling to Northern Ireland, you need to have a responsible person in place. So this is just to show kind of like the product listings that you need to include. If it's online in your packaging, you've got the registered company address. Now that can be postal or it can be an electronic address as well. So if it's just an email address, basically easily contactable, and it's clear for everybody to see how to get hold of the responsible person. And any other relevant information, like I said, the safety information, any batch serial numbers, all of this that might be relevant for identifying and tracing the product back. And the other thing, it needs to be in a language that's easily understood where the product is going to be for sale. So that might be in multiple languages, or I guess like we have with our clothing, it might need to be in symbols to show that it's washing, dry clean safe, and all that kind of thing. If that's relevant, then that's what you need to show it as. So who does this legislation apply to? Well, if you're in the business of selling a product to a consumer, then it applies to you. Whether you're the manufacturer, the distributor, the reseller, we're all in that same compliance boat. So yeah, it applies to all products that you want to sell into the EU, and that is everything from kids' toys to coffee mugs, whether it's low risk or high risk. Basically, if you're selling something that's going to end up in a customer's hands, then these GPSR regulations are now applying to you. Let's talk a bit about online sellers for just a second. Like I said, if you're selling products online, you need to make it just as easy for your customers to contact you if they have any safety issues about the product that you've sold. And you need to make sure that your point of contact is clear on your website. It could be just as simple as having a link on your website or a link to a contact form, but it has to be straightforward and easy for them to find you. If the customer feels like you're hiding your contact information, you're now not complying, basically. So yeah, who does GPSR apply to? Pretty much anyone and everyone with a product to sell. But I guess the silver lining here is by complying with this legislation and showing that you're complying, you are basically showing how trustworthy you are as a seller. And we know how much trust plays a big part in how people buy and who they shop from. So there are consequences of non-compliance. They are extreme. So let's not get too bogged down in them or get too scared of them. But yeah, they could result in your product being recalled if there's a safety issue. It could then lead to you being fined, and fined not just because your product has had a problem, but just by not complying. If you haven't shown the packaging information, if you haven't shown the safety regulations, all that would be non-compliance, and there would be a fine for it. But I think, I know it's just my personal opinion, but this legislation is not aimed at the small business owners. It's really aimed at the larger business sellers. So they're kind of the people they're looking to get to with this legislation. We all need to comply. We should all be doing this anyway. We should all be selling safe products anyway, but we need to have the paperwork to prove it. But let's not get too bogged down in the non-compliance consequences. I mean, nobody wants to be selling a product that's going to get recalled anyway. So it's probably something you're already complying with. So just wanted to make a quick mention here of how we are helping our other UK-based customers. Because we're Northern Ireland based, that means we can act as the responsible person for other product sellers, be that they are manufacturing or they are selling, or in some cases, we actually offer order fulfillment services to our customers as well. So we can stand in place for them as their responsible person because we are EU based. So we will provide the safety documentation and we make sure everything's order. We've got the test reports and the risk assessments, which they will have carried out. That will have been carried out by the manufacturer, and then they'll pass that through to us. We will make sure that the product labeling and the tagging are all in place. That small print that we know is so important, making sure that the products are labeled correctly with relevant warning instructions and holding that traceable information that GPSR requires. And then if there is an issue, we are in place to handle any contact or correspondence with any relevant authorities on their behalf, answer the questions quickly, provide the necessary documentation, and ensure everything's sorted. The vast majority of products that we sell are considered to be low risk. especially when you consider that most of the products are going to be actually manufactured and we're taking a blank product and amending it or personalizing it or printing it. So the actual traceability is going to go back to the manufacturer. But yes, we essentially offer our services as the responsible person, and that means that our customers are basically compliant. So I copied this basically straight from the government's website to explain how NI businesses need to be compliant with GPSR, but we don't need to make any additional changes to actually place our products on the GB market. But the GB market needs to make changes to continue to sell to Northern Ireland. And I just wanted to put this in because all of the information, we've had to do our own investigation to make sure that we are GPSR compliant for ourselves, for our customers. But this is my own research for our needs and our requirements as the supplier. I would absolutely recommend that you do your own research and actually make sure that you are compliant for yourselves as well. Okay, so that's us and our GPSR compliance.
Thank you so much, Marie. Wow, that was so interesting. Goodness. And I don't know about you, but having a little bit more knowledge, quite a bit more knowledge, gives me a lot more confidence, and it certainly takes the pressure off, because it's something that I think a lot of us have felt, oh my goodness, suddenly can I not sell to Europe anymore? What's going on? So thank you very much. Just for the benefit of everybody watching, I work alongside Marie in something called Pod 123, where we do print on demand, giving people their own websites, their own online stores. So having Marie's knowledge on this subject is really, really helpful. I've got to say, it's really helpful and a tremendous relief. And also, how lucky is it? I mean, talk about forward planning, that you happen to be in Northern Ireland. That is brilliant. Who knew this was coming? And the fact it's Northern Ireland because the soft border. Could you explain a bit about what you mean by soft border for people who maybe don't really understand?
I don't want to get political. I don't want to go down that road, but everybody knows Ireland consists of two parts. There's Northern Ireland and there's Southern Ireland. And Southern Ireland has for many, many years been part of Europe in its own right. We are part of the larger UK, the portion that exists of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So when this thing called Brexit occurred, we all saw the news, and it went on for weeks about how Northern Ireland was going to exist, how we were going to continue to trade with Southern Ireland. So what's had to happen is they've had to put an agreement in place so that there's this thing called a soft border between Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland. That actually gives Northern Ireland a massive advantage in many respects, trading into the whole of EU, not just this GPSR compliance legislation, but customs as well, because we don't have to go through a lot of the hoops and documentation that you guys do in the rest of the GB. And this is just another example of us being able to take advantage of what we call the soft border. It basically means that even though Southern Ireland is Europe and we're UK, we don't have to comply with the same customs and procedures and legislation that the rest of the GB does. So that gives us a massive advantage.
So for me as a print on demand seller, if I'm doing it through your company, so you are my pod fulfillment company, which with all the Pod 123 websites that we do, that is how it works. If that's the situation, that gives us a tremendous benefit. But I know that by doing it through you, we've got all these boxes ticked. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. People have kind of because of the misunderstanding, I think, and the lack of transparency around this, a lot of people have got somewhat confused. So there's people just stopping selling into Northern Ireland and to the rest of Europe when they actually didn't need to. So I kind of wanted to get this out there because I think let's not stop selling when we absolutely don't need to. So yes, our print on demand customers, all our merch customers, are automatically, it's only relevant if they're selling. Obviously, we supply to business customers. This is relevant if the product is going to a customer, to the consumer.
Okay.
Which is an important point to make as well, which, you know, obviously when we're talking about print on demand, it is going, you know, to a consumer, to the customer. So it's very relevant to that. But because we're based in Northern Ireland, we are automatically compliant. Yes, we have to put in place our packaging and our safety assessment, and which is paperwork, really, and we should all be doing it. It's really something that's already in place, especially when you're looking at the things that we sell. They're very, very low risk, and to carry out there are no safety regulations that need to accompany them. You know, I can't actually think of anything that we sell on behalf of our print on demand customers that is actually going to require safety regulations. I don't know any at-risk hoodies or compliance needed for a mug or anything like that. So, but it's just the fact that we're already in the EU now. No EU responsible person has to be appointed on your behalf because we're already it, basically.
Okay. And is it going to be clear on the websites that are produced through Pod 123 and via that?
Yeah, so we will automatically have, when you use one of our e-commerce platforms, obviously you get a template, and the template is going to include your compliance and it will state us as your responsible person. You don't have to state us as the supplier, because we know a lot of print on demand clients do not want their supplier to be visible. And when we show you the e-commerce website, we are not visible to your customers. As far as they're concerned, it's your website. It will show our address, and that's really all that's relevant. Not us. It's still complete. We're still completely invisible to your clients, but it will show that you have a compliance partner, and it will show our address, and therefore anything you sell from that website will be compliant.
And that is a really good point, actually, because you don't want your competitors to see which companies you're using.
No.
I mean, that would just make business so difficult, wouldn't it?
Exactly. You've done your research, you've looked into who you want to work with, you found this great partnership, you've got a great relationship going, and now everybody's going to know. And they're going to, all that time you've taken to do the research and possibly even had bad situations that you've had to learn from. No, keep it to yourself. Absolutely.
Fantastic. I do have a question that's come up from one of my subscribers to my channel, and that is, and this is particularly involving Printful, but the rules are the same, aren't they?
Yeah.
So this is their question. So my confusion is whether I should put Printful's name or the name of the original manufacturer. I'm doing wall art, so Printful uses a separate poster manufacturer. Should I put the poster manufacturer or Printful? So following on from what you just said, in that case, it would be Printful that they put, and Printful's responsible person. Is that correct?
Yeah, as I understand, they're using their platform to sell from, aren't they? So that
no, with Printful, they're using Printful is the fulfillment company, but they're probably selling it on something like Shopify or through their own website. So the place they're selling it from would be their own site.
Well, their print on demand supplier will show their compliance. They will need to have that on their platform. You can take that information and use it in your compliance. You don't even have to show your supplier's name. We go back to the point we made before. You don't need to share that with everybody else out there. And you absolutely don't need to go back to the manufacturer, because that's your supplier's part in the chain. They've ensured they've complied. They've asked the relevant questions of the step in the chain before them. You're now 2 steps afterwards, if you like. So you only need to make sure you're complying with your part in the traceability. So if you're going straight to the customer, you need to show where the customer has, the customer's purchase, where that product came from. That goes back to your supplier. As long as you have got the compliance of your supplier, you are complying with the procedures.
that's where this confusion has come up really for print on demand sellers. But to know then that we just have to do that step above us. It's almost like a family tree, isn't it?
Yeah.
To
I
know.
think it's also important to say, yes, this legislation seems to be quite vague, but it's vague for a reason, because there's lots of specific legislation for specific types of products. So it's really intended to sweep up everything else.
I see.
So where they know there is like a high risk product, and let's talk about fireworks, knives, electronics, there is specific legislation in place for those from the EU. But they're also very aware that there's then a lot that actually isn't being accounted for. So it's intentionally vague.
Oh, I
So
see.
let's just everybody calm down, because there's a reason for that. But it also, we have to look at what we're selling. So first of all, take into account the fact that it's low risk to start with. 99.9% of what we're selling, certainly in the print on demand marketplace, that there is, I can't even think of any possible scenario where there's going to be harm to the end user, and that's really what it boils down to. The not fit for purpose obviously goes straight back to the manufacturer. So that happens already, and these things are already in place. We're all already doing them. We're all already keeping records of where we buy things from and who we sell them to. We're just basically ticking a few extra boxes and making sure that people can see that we've taken those steps. That's really all it is. And it's also, like I say, intended for the big business. So I mean, again, only my opinion, but I can't see any time soon that the regulatory body is going to start checking the websites and the packages and the orders of the hundreds of thousands of smaller sellers out there. But we should be doing this already, so it does no harm. It's a few extra tick boxes. The issue seems to be for you guys in the greater GB area, and I think places like Etsy and Amazon have maybe also not helped with the vague information. They seem to have taken a club hammer to some scenarios. It stopped sellers selling when they didn't need to have stopped selling. Yes, they will have needed to have appointed a responsible person if they want to continue selling, but that's very easy and straightforward to do. There are companies like ourselves where you can basically call us up. Will you act as my responsible person? We don't need to be handling your orders. Your products don't need to be going through us. You basically have just hired us, or and other companies that are doing the same thing, because we know there's this need for the responsible person, the need that they need to be EU based, and we are based in Northern Ireland, so we can stand as a responsible person. So we are offering that as a service to product sellers as well, not just our print on demand customers.
I was going to say, so this
we automatically become their responsible person. That's all that really means.
Okay, so from the point of view of people who are using you as print service in the traditional sense rather than print on demand.
Yeah,
that's very interesting, very enlightening, and quite a relief, as I say.
I think really what I want to do is don't be concerned, don't be overly worried, don't get. I mean, I know it's vague and that leaves people feeling uneasy, but let's calm down, and please don't pull yourself out of marketplaces you don't need to pull yourself. It's easily sorted. Appoint a responsible person, and you can continue to sell just as you were before.
From the responsible person's point of view, is there a huge risk factor in that? If somebody approaches you, somebody random approaches you, saying they're selling rubber ducks, right? I don't know where that came from. Selling rubber ducks, and they appoint you, is it up to you, your due diligence to make sure that those rubber ducks are safe, or is it just a case of we're providing the address and that's
I mean, everything goes back to the manufacturer. So if we're acting on behalf of either the manufacturer or the reseller, we're not carrying out the risk assessment. We're taking their documentation. They will have carried out the risk assessment, or they have the safety requirements, or they know what their regulations are. So we're just taking their documentation, holding it on behalf of them, essentially. Now, if something happens and that rubber duck explodes in a bath and
Why did I think something
bath,
that's going to fall off?
spontaneously combusts in the bath one day, what's going to happen is they're going to come to us as a responsible person. Okay, customer bought this duck. Where did it come from? We go back to the traceability, and that goes back to the manufacturer. At no point are we responsible for making sure that that product is safe.
Right.
And essentially, neither are you as a reseller. As long as you've got the relevant documentation from the manufacturer, as long as that meets the safety requirements, which I can't think in any scenario that isn't already happening. It's just ticking the box to make sure everybody knows that it has. That's it.
And this is something that you should have been doing anyway.
Absolutely. These are all products are going to have safety requirements on them. It's just making sure that, you know, you tick the box to say they've got safety requirements. And again, not all products require safety regulations to be on them because they don't have any implications for safety. A t-shirt does not have safety requirements put on it for obvious reasons. The important fact here when you're looking at non-compliance as well is you have taken the best endeavour to make sure that you are compliant. Right. Completely ignoring it and taking no notice, that's going to get taken into account if there is an issue. But if there is an issue and you've shown that to your best endeavour, you have made sure that you are compliant, that is absolutely going to be taken into account as well.
Yeah, and I suspect the way they'll monitor it is they will do spot checks, like we have in Britain with tax. You know, they'll do a spot check and thoroughly investigate one particular company. They won't do it to every particular company.
I think what you'll find is maybe going to be more relevant to potentially some of the sellers you have here. Amazon, Etsy, and those third-party marketplaces are going to ask you the question as to the fact that you're compliant, because they know in the wider marketplace it's a requirement for them to be compliant. So this it's all cascading down. So for you to sell on their marketplace, they will ask you the question and you need to say, yes, you are. And then, I don't know, they may ask for some proof of that.
The way it's gone, the way it seems to have gone is that they've provided information. So, for example, like fulfillment companies like Printful and Printify have already come up with addresses that you can put onto your list.
I mean, the thing is about those print-on-demand suppliers, they use a number of different, depending on where your order has been made from, their print house is going to be there. So they may or may not be in the use. So they have had to appoint a responsible person in a central location for everybody to be compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think both of those big ones, which are now both one anyway, because they've recently merged, they both have Cypriot addresses, I believe.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It does. Yeah. Whatever head office sits in Cyprus, that's where they decided their compliance addresses.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. So thinking about the print-on-demand platforms, things like Redbubble, Society6, things like that, what would be your take on that situation? So they are effectively the seller and you are an artist that submits your work to be sold through those platforms. So does that mean that it's not really your problem, it's their problem?
Yeah, pretty much, absolutely. Because the thing is with print on demand, I know it's quite unique, but it's still the same. You purchasing a product to be sold to your customer. So it's absolutely no different than going to somebody like us and buying 1,000 things, 1,000 t-shirts, and then you taking them away and you selling them to your customer. All print on demand is doing as a concept is taking like a couple of steps out of the process, but the end result is exactly the same. You've hired a company to manufacture something on your behalf before you sell it to your customer. So as the supplier, as the manufacturer, they have to make sure that they are compliant. The difference is with the platforms where the customer is purchasing directly from that platform, they have to have shown that they are compliant to be able. So if that customer comes to them and they're in the EU, they will have to show that they're compliant before they can send it to them. So they're kind of doing that on your behalf, or at least they should be.
Thanks, Marie. That's been brilliant. That's been so interesting and so helpful. And I feel like I can breathe a bit better now, and I'll certainly sleep a bit better. But please will you give me your details so I can put them down in the description below so people can come along and find your website. Also, you can find Marie as part of Pod 123, the thing that we do together. So if you'd like to find out more about that, I'll also put a link to that down below. Thank you. Thanks very much, Marie. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for having me. Glad I could help.